Welcome to Something More with Chris Boyd. Chris Boyd is a certified financial planner practitioner and senior vice president and financial advisor at Wealth Enhancement Group, one of the nation's largest registered investment advisors. We call it Something More because we'd like to talk not only about those important dollar and cents issues, but also the quality of life issues that make the money matters matter. Here he is, your fulfillment facilitator, your partner in prosperity, advising clients on Cape Cod and across the country. Here's your host, J. Christopher Boyd.
Welcome. I'm Chris Boyd. I'm here with Jeff Perry. We are both of the AMR team at Wealth Enhancement and glad to have you with us. We have a special guest today, Fritz Gilbert. He is the author of the blog website, The Retirement Manifesto, as well as the book, The Keys to Successful Retirement. Thank you, Jeff. We're going to get a lot from our conversation today. And Fritz, it's great to have you here. Thanks for being with us. First.
Hey, thanks for the invitation, Chris. I look forward to talking with you and Jeff.
Tell us, to start with, you have an interesting backstory that led you to this passion that you have today. This wasn't what you've always done, is it?
No, I was a corporate guy for 33 years, worked in the global aluminum business and got out at 55. So a little bit of an early retiree, and actually started the blog 3 years before I retired as kind of a curiosity experiment, just to say, hey, let's see how this goes. And turned out that I really enjoy writing, and it's kind of gotten some traction and turned into a thing. And it's kind of become one of my purposes in retirement. So yeah, I enjoy it. Yeah.
Well, that's what we're going to talk about a little bit. Those keys to successful retirement, I'm sure.
How much of the starting the blog was your own process of what am I going to do?
Yeah, it's interesting, Jeff, because if you look through the blog, when I started writing it, you can kind of tell where my head was at. And one of the lines in my earliest post, I think it might have been my first one. This is the story of my present before it becomes my past. So it's kind of a journaling exercise, but really what it is here are the things that I'm thinking about as I prepare for and then transition into and now live in retirement. Here are the things I'm thinking about at the various stages. And here's the way I'm going about it. Hey, I don't care if you use these, tactics or not. It's just the things that I'm thinking about and the ways I'm going about it. And I've had a lot of readers that are saying, man, that's really helpful because it kind of gives me a framework of the way to think about things, make sure I'm not missing some blind spots. So it started very much focused on the financials, am I able to retire? A lot of stuff on the financial stuff. And then as I moved into retirement, you can see my thinking shifting more away from the financials, as everybody does, right? And into the kind of what's the purpose of life type thing, which is what I write more about now. So it's a good fit with Something More. It fits well.
The Something More is really, we certainly can talk about the how to earn something more part of things, but it's really the idea that there's more to it. There's more to life.
Yeah.
It's not just about the money.
Yeah.
So yeah, you got it.
I felt like you were writing to me when I read that when you write talking about tracking your net worth is not a goal.
Yeah.
I said, well, it was my goal for 25 years.
Yeah. And I've had so many friends. A lot. Right. I was kind of in the fire community. I was out at 55, so kind of late fire, but early retirees. And so many of them have said, my whole goal has been to get to X millions of dollars, whatever their number was.
What's the number, right?
But getting to the number doesn't really bring fulfillment. It just brings that it's a tool, right? It's a tool to allow you to go out and do the things that are going to bring you real fulfillment. Having a number as a objective for fulfillment is sorely lacking once you achieve it. It's just, okay, it's another day. You wake up. What are you going to do now?
Exactly the same experience. We hit the number and it's like, okay, should we just raise the number? Is that our new goal?
yeah, exactly.
That's a great point. Yeah. How do you know when you're ready?
Okay, now what?
Yeah. And this kind of led to my book, The Keys to a Successful Retirement. What I discovered in a lot of my research, the non-financial aspects of your retirement before you get there. And exactly those questions, Jeff, that you were just raising, what are you going to do now? And the way I like to think about it is you think about losing the paycheck when you retire, but you don't necessarily think about losing your sense of identity, your, the relationships at work, your sense of purpose, all those other non-financial benefits. Thinking about how you're going to replace each one of those as well as the paycheck before you retire can be really helpful in making for a smooth transition. The majority of retirees struggle with the transition for exactly those reasons that you mentioned. And the more you can think about those things before you retire, the smoother the transition. And that's been proven by research. So my writing basically provided me that avenue of exploring those other areas, and it helped tremendously. And my transition was as smooth as could be. I'm very pleased with how my transition's gone.
Yeah, you wrote in the last column, which maybe we'll have time to review some of it, but you wrote that retirement itself increases the probability of depression by up to 40%.
Yeah, it's a big number, and people don't necessarily think about that. They think, oh, it's going to be a vacation. It's going to be just, I don't have to get up to the alarm clock. And everybody has that honeymoon phase. There's a viral TED talk from a guy, Moily Rhines, that talks about the 4 stages of retirement. Is my most read post because I wrote an article about that video. And then I talked about each of the phases and my experience with them. And, everybody goes through the honeymoon phase. But what people don't recognize is that phase 2, that kind of disorientation can lead to depression. That phase 2 is 85% of retirees get into that. And it's not a good place to be, and it takes some time, typically a couple of years, to kind of work through it. It's all self-driven. You've got to find your way out of it. You don't have a boss anymore. And it's all through kind of trial and experimentation, which is phase 3, when you start finally kind of listening to your curiosity and just exploring different things. And with time, like my blog, a few things start to click and they start, hitting for you and you're enjoying them, and then you're on your way. And then phase 4 is kind of when you found that fulfillment and purpose, phase, which only 65% of retirees actually make it to phase 4, but it's a wonderful place to be. And that's where I'm at now. And I'm loving life.
How does one begin this process? How to be thinking about this?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing I would say, Chris, is make a list of the things that you maybe don't recognize that you're getting from work. Let's assume you got a year or 2 left to work. You're going to do the financials. You've got to do the financials. So let's just leave that as obvious. They're necessary, but not sufficient. And then kind of go beyond it and say, okay, what about my sense of identity? My sense of identity is going to be gone. Nobody's going to care that I was an aluminum guy, right? So what do I want to be?
That's a good point. I mean, it's hard to kind of envision that thought process.
It is.
You're kind of, I don't know if this is always the case for women as much as men, but definitely, and generalizing, but men definitely tie a lot of their identity to their work experience.
Absolutely. And I think the challenging part of all this is, especially those of us who have kind of been more, I guess, is it left brained or right brained? I get them mixed up, but the more analytical side, which tends to serve you well in your career, is not really the way you find your way out of these other elements. It's more of a creative, artistic exploration, curiosity pursuit. So it's a muscle that you really haven't exercised probably since you were in kindergarten or whatever, and you were just free to go out and play and do what interested you. And so a part of it is just learning how to get that muscle back engaged and, trying, there's a lot of books about this. I think about, Doc G, he wrote his book about the purpose code, and his whole thing is just find something that kind of interests you, intrigues you. He's talking about baseball cards, collecting baseball cards, and just start pursuing these things that kind of interest you. And that's typically how most people find out. Charity work. My wife started a great charity called Freedom for Fido, which I'm very active in, and finding a way to give back to a community is a really good place to look as well. Because as you have more free time and you've kind of met your material needs, it's a really fulfilling area to explore helping other people that haven't yet fulfilled their material needs, and you've got time and freedom to do it. So that's a really good way to get some fulfillment, as well as just, volunteer with a couple charities in your area. And, maybe you don't like the first one, fine, go to the second and third, fourth. And eventually you'll kind of find a group of people. So what do you get? You get your relationships, right? You start getting this network of people that are working towards a common goal. You get that feeling of purpose because you're giving back to something, and you get a sense of identity because you're that guy that works at Freedom for Fido or writes that blog, whatever. Finding a way where you're benefiting others is that's fertile ground to plow.
And sometimes that's hard for people to find. So, the best thing to do is just try and do something.
Yeah, exactly.
If that works. And if that doesn't work, try something different.
Yeah, the worst thing you can do is just sit in your recliner and watch YouTube videos or whatever. You've got to get out there and try stuff. Absolutely.
There is something worse. You could watch the news.
The news all day.
In your last article that's on your website, a lot of great content. People should check it out and subscribe. We talk about purpose a lot, and we kind of touched about that, but go on to structure, because I think when thinking about retirement, a lot of people think the opposite of structure. I don't have a schedule. I don't have to be anywhere. I don't want to have any commitments. A lot of people approach like this newfound freedom, but that may not be the best case, you think?
Absolutely. I think one of the surprises that a lot of people face is, oh, that unstructured life is going to be great. But the reality of it is, when you've gone from a 30 to 40-year career, even back to your school days, right? School is structured. So your whole life since you were 5 or 6 years old has been structured, very structured. The time you get up, you got to be a certain place. You've got certain things you got to get done. You got a certain time you get excused. You've got structure to your entire day for 40 years. And suddenly you have no structure. And that's a really disorienting phase. That's part of why people get into this phase 2 of disorientation. Mm-hmm. And it's not always intuitive why you feel disoriented, but a big piece of it can be structure. The fact that you went from a fully structured day to a fully unstructured day. So what I encourage people to do, and this is what I did, is I said, okay, I'm going to add some structure to my day. So I went, I joined a local gym and I took classes, 3 days a week. So Monday, Wednesday, Friday, 7:00, I was at the gym, right? And I was working out for a couple of days. And I found that adding some structure really helps. Now, you don't have to fill your day with structure. What I've tended to evolve into is kind of a more structured morning. That's kind of my writing time. I'll do podcast interviews, et cetera. I'll kind of do blog stuff. And then in the afternoon, I kind of keep it open, and it's kind of a more serendipitous part of my day, which I enjoy. But having some structure kind of keeps you grounded. You know what day of the week it is. It helps. It helps. So unstructured sounds great, but that's one of those things that you lose from work, like the relationships, like the sense of purpose, like the activities and objectives and things you're working towards. Structure is one of those things. And it's good to think about before you retire, how much structure do I want in my life? Maybe you think you want none.
Right.
That's fine. You can go into it with that mindset. But at least have some ideas of how could you add structure back to your day. I went to the gym, right? That's an option. You can, I'm going to walk, a couple days a week with my best friend, John. I'm going to hook up with him and we're going to start walking together. I'm going to play pickleball on Tuesdays, whatever. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of ways you can add structure, unlimited ways you can add structure. So think about that. Think about ways that you could add it and experiment with that. That's one of the levers that you have to play with.
You made reference a couple of times to going out and play, and a lot of these you go into the gym.
Yeah.
Talk about that notion of the importance of the physical exercise and just maintenance, if you will.
That for in my case and in many other retirees, I just read a really good article by Dr. Grumman. He talked about he went to a financial retreat in Bali. And he said, people weren't even talking about money. Everybody was talking about fitness. Like, what are you doing? And it's interesting. I think one of the ways you can replace that striving that you've had to build a certain net worth number and all those things, well, you can redirect that energy to say, okay, how can I improve myself? And what can I do, I read, was it Outlive? I got on my thing over there, a book. I read a lot of books. How can you expand your health span so that you'll get as many years of healthy activity as you can? Because if you don't focus on it, you will naturally atrophy, and Younger Next Year is a great case. This doctor writes with one of his clients about the reality that you can do stuff in your 70s that you did in your 30s and 40s. If you stay continually focused on doing, you don't have to be crazy. You can just go out and he says a minimum is like a good 45-minute walk, maybe 6 days a week, something equivalent to that. So if you can do something where you're just moving, you're using your body, and number one, it makes you feel good. Number two, it adds some structure to your day. Number three, you feel a sense of accomplishment. And number four, you increase your odds of having more years that you can do the things that you want to do. You can pick up your grandkids. Being intentional about that is something you can do with the free time and retirement that brings, tremendous benefits.
One of the things that I would ask you to think about or to comment about is the idea that, as we age, we tend to have more chronic health challenges. We spend more time going to doctors. And how does that, and I think sometimes that can affect your passion for life, right?
Yes, no doubt.
It can undermine your sense of enthusiasm and so forth. And so I imagine, the things you're talking about, investing in yourself, can help to have maybe less of those chronic issues perhaps, and more intellectual stimulation or spiritual or whatever the areas one may choose to select. But there are some things beyond our control, I imagine, and that can undermine some of this ultimately, correct?
Yeah, it can, Chris. But the way I look at it is, there's only so many things within our control. Yeah. So I control the things I can. And I've got a friend of mine. I'm actually going to go have lunch with him today. And he's getting to the point where his body's starting to break down. He's in his late 70s, early 80s, 78. And he's starting to struggle with the fact, he said, I can't do stuff I used to do. And he's kind of getting depressed about it,
Yeah.
We will all get there at some point.
Right.
So the question is, what can we do now that hopefully delays that process as much as we can, delay it, which you can delay it a lot, but the reality, you're not going to delay it forever. So the other part is getting your mindset around the reality that we're all going to die someday, right? None of us are going to get out of here alive, and finding a way that you accept that reality of mortality, which to me gives more of the urgency to enjoying and living each day to the fullest.
The most of the time you have.
Absolutely. Yeah. Die with zero, right? The die with zero concept. It's not about, he talks about the financial, but I went into this book thinking this is ludicrous. Nobody knows when they're going to die. How can you drain your bank? That's not the point at all. The point is, think about your life aspirations and the things you want to do and sequence them. Right. If you want to climb Mount Everest, man, you better do it before you're, 50 or whatever the age is that you can tap out. And if you want to go, we went to the Arctic this summer, my wife and I, and part of the reason we went, we're 62. We're like, hey, we're in great health. We can do this. We can go anywhere we want to go. Once we get up there, we can hike, remote stuff doesn't matter. We're in good shape. Let's do it now, because if we wait, maybe we can't. Maybe I'll get sick, right? Maybe cancer will pop up. Who knows? So it's also recognizing, okay, what are the things that you really want to do in your life? And are you, instead of just procrastinating, are you kind of prioritizing and making sure the things that you really want to do are getting scheduled, because you don't want to, get to that point and then have regrets that you procrastinated on something that, you're really interested in doing. So there's a lot of facets that you can look at this thing. But it's a really important reality to get your head around and figure out how you're going to address it.
Think about Mount Everest or anything, those big goals, right? I don't think people regret something if they try it and fail.
Correct.
It's the regrets are, I wish talking about Doc G's books, a lot of that's in there.
Yeah.
But if you try something and you're not successful, you gave it your best effort, I don't think there's a regret there. No. So don't be afraid of failure is important, I think.
That's right. Look at Mike Drack. Mike Drack's a Canadian guy. I enjoy him. He's written a couple books. Retirement Heaven or Hell is one of them. But he's 70 years old, and he set a goal. He was going to do an Ironman for his 70th birthday. So he goes out, and I'm going to do this Ironman. He failed. He had a mechanical problem on his bike, of all things. But he said, you know what? He said, now that I've had time to think about it, that wasn't the point. The point was it gave me 6 months to train for something. Right. I got in really good shape. I was involved in other athletes doing this. And I got so many other benefits from striving towards this goal that I'm really glad I undertook the challenge. And that was his success. It wasn't that I completed the Ironman. It was, hey, it gave me a really good 6 month period of time here where I got myself in better shape. I feel good about it. And he was really pleased that he did it, even though he never completed it. So yeah, you're spot on, Jeff.
I'm just going to put a caveat to that. When you're climbing Mount Everest, that might be the exception. You fail there.
You fail, you die.
Yeah.
All right. Extreme example.
Yes.
Talk about social connection, Fritz. And I've noticed in not my study, but in my personal neighbors, relationships, people that I know, this is a harder thing for men than women. But talk about why it's so important and some strategies that you've found successful.
Yeah, there's no doubt it's harder for men. I don't know why. It's just the reality. Women just tend to be better at getting together and having lunch with friends and doing stuff. I don't know what it is. But again, this is one of those areas, like we said, besides the paycheck, right? It's going to be relationships. And you think those people are friends, but they're work friends. You're not going to keep in touch with them after you retire. You think you will, but realistically, you probably won't. And
to have in common. don't have in common anymore.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah. And even if you try to go back in the office and have lunch with them, a couple times a year, they're on to different things. You can't really relate to what they're talking about. There's a new boss in town. You don't know who the guy is, right? It's not the same. So one of the things I encourage people to do is in your last year or two of retirement, start thinking about what relationships do I have that are going to be here after I'm gone from work. And typically there aren't too many, right? You've got your spouse if you're married. So foster that relationship. That's huge. Make sure you're planning for retirement together. I wrote a whole chapter in my book about that.
Jeff's big on that topic.
It's a big one. And so let's say that one's obvious, but I don't want to undermine it.
It's not always easy though.
No, it's not easy. So that's a huge one. We could do a whole podcast on that. Beyond that though, I would say, I'll give you an example in my case. There was a little festival in our town here, and they had a little author's booth. And I was in the process of, my blog was getting some traction, and I hadn't written a book yet, but I was like, oh, there's local people that write. I should go up to this author's booth. So I went up to this author's booth, and there was a book laying on the table about some personal finance thing. And the guy's name was on there. And I said, oh, is Ed around? And they're like, no, he's not working the booth today, but here's his card. So I said, I don't know this guy, but I gave him a call and said, hey, Ed, I was down at the author's booth. I saw your book. I'm getting ready to retire. You want to go out and have lunch together? And that turned into every month for years. He unfortunately has passed away, but we had lunch together, once a month, or maybe every other month. And he became a good friend of mine we had a common interest, right? We were writing about personal finance. And I intentionally fostered that because of this exercise. Hey, I don't really have too many friends outside of the workplace. Where can I start establishing some friendships outside of work that'll be there after I'm gone? So look at things like that. Just be open to it and don't be afraid to call. The other area, back to the charity. I've got more friends now than I've ever had in my life. And most of them are coming from this Freedom for Fido charity. We call it the Fido family. There's a core of volunteers. We'll get together and go to a microbrew just spontaneously. Somebody will shoot out a group text, say, hey, you want to go meet up at Grumpy's, in a couple hours. And 20 of us will show up. And so there's this natural group of friendships that have developed through this charity work. And they're really good friends, and we'll do stuff outside of the charity with some regularity. And then the last one I would think of, if you're not involved in a church, get involved in church, get in small group Bible study. There are a lot of areas that you can develop good friendships, but it takes intentionality. And if you don't pursue it, loneliness is not a way you want to spend your retirement. And a lot of people are lonely in retirement.
That's true. Yeah. I'll throw one more in there based on my experience when we relocated to Florida, pickleball.
Yeah, sure. Absolutely. Yep.
Let's stretch.
Somebody must have pulled a muscle. There's a story there.
Well, there's a lot of stories about pickleball.
There's always a risk of injury, right?
The number one cause of injury in our neighborhood is pickleball injuries.
I think that's true in the nation right now for anybody over 60. Yeah.
They have
a
lot of fun, and you don't have to be great at it to still have a lot of fun. And
exactly.
Social connection. Totally.
Another thing, like where I live, they have hiking clubs, right? I live in a very outdoorsy area. So, look for opportunities in your local area of clubs that do things that interest you, and get involved in a few clubs, reading clubs, anything that interests you. There's clubs out there for it.
I really love the idea. You mentioned the charitable involvement in a variety of comments. I just really love the idea of that, because it really is something when you give of yourself, when you go outside of yourself, you really do get so much from it. There's a sense of well-being that, you're doing something constructive, you're helping other people. And something about that really comes back to you in a way that you're really helping others, but there's a certain fulfillment benefit that comes from that.
No doubt. And I think it's people listening to this will say, oh yeah, but, right? There's always a but. It's hard to get I'd almost call it courage to go out and get engaged in something, because it's just easier to just inertia, right?
Right.
So yes, and if you read people that have had successful retirements, look at the percentage of them that are involved in one way or another in charity. It's overwhelmingly the majority, right? So I don't care what excuses you want to make. Just go out there and try one or two or three, and it didn't really work out. Fine. Go to another one. And what you'll find is you'll You'll get the relationships, you'll get the sense of purpose, you'll add structure to your day.
Mhm.
You know, it adds so many elements that you miss when you leave the workplace. I think that's why it's so fulfilling, and you have that feel good thing from, you know, giving back to other people. And it's much more, I would say, you can write a check, right? That's easy. But you don't get the same level of fulfillment writing a check as you do getting involved personally and contributing, you know, muscle to the effort.
Yeah. Yeah. And so it is a commitment of time, and
Yep.
you know, which is a precious commodity, right? When we get to a certain stage of
Yep.
life, you know, but there's the social connection, there's the sense of fulfillment. There's a lot of the good that can come out of that,
Yeah.
over and above, you know, maybe the money you might contribute as well, or something like that.
Yeah.
You know, let's just you referencing this article, you know, so a portion of it did have to do with the money side of things. I think Jeff and I like having a guest like you on because we talk about the money stuff regularly, but we don't always have the chance to talk about some of these things that contribute to one's fulfillment as much as we'd like. So we certainly can talk more about that, but I do think it's important to just mention these other contents. And one of them was, you talked about the idea that you have to plan for the unexpected, and maybe you could mention some of that.
Yeah. The article that you're talking about for the readers, it was 3 questions that determine 99% of your retirement success. So there were 3 questions that I encourage my readers to answer. And the first one was, do you have a reliable cash flow plan? Which basically, if you projected your expenses, if you looked at how much income you can, you know, get from your Social Security, pension, if you're fortunate, you know, safe withdrawal rate from your investments, etc. But beyond just doing that exercise, which surprisingly few people actually go through it, it's shocking. But even if you've gone through that exercise, the second question is, have you made a plan for unexpected expenses? And you will have unexpected, I call them the unexpected expected expenses,
Yeah.
right? They're expected. You know, you're
Right.
going to have to replace your roof. You know, you're going to have to replace your car. A buddy of mine just got in a car accident, right? Unexpected. You're going to have those things. So how do you build that into your plan? And what I referenced, I read an article, I read a book actually by the Wall Street Journal as I was planning for my retirement. And I really liked the approach that they went. They basically amortized that. You think of all the major expenses, you know, mainly around maintenance for a house, but, you know, replacing a car. And you basically say, okay, if I'm going to have a car, let's just do an easy one. Let's say a car is, I'll make the math easy. It's a little exaggerated. Let's say a car is $100,000 and it's going to last 10 years. That's $10,000 a year. So let's say it's, you know, whatever, $750 a month. Okay, you add that to the spreadsheet. And you basically go through that. How much is a roof? $20,000. How long does it last? 20 years. Okay, that's $1,000 a year. That's $100 a month. And you add all of those up, and what you end up with is a number. And mine is $1,000 a month, $12,000 a year, roughly, from that exercise. So what I do is I basically, as I'm calculating my safe withdrawal rate, every year at the end of the year, I look at my updated net worth. I look at a 3.5%, 4% safe withdrawal rate. I say, okay, I can spend that much. The first 12,000 of that amount, I pull out and I put in a segregated account for emergencies.
Yeah.
And then I spend the rest of my safe withdrawal rate. So I've got it already baked into the safe withdrawal rate, so I won't overspend. And it's got some kind of logic for how it's created. And now you've got a pool of money, and I just have it in a Capital One 360 money market account. You can segregate those accounts, which is nice. So I've got a retirement emergency account. And if something comes up, oh, I got to replace the roof. No problem. You go in there and you pull the cash out of that. You know you're within your safe spending limits. That's how I manage it.
I love it. That's great. That's really good. And just you know, very methodical. You know, and I think you're absolutely right. I mean, too often people will try to pretend that they've thought of everything when they really know that there's other things that are out there that will come along. You know.
Yeah.
And so this is a way to do it. I like that. We try to think about some of these issues when we do our financial planning, and you know, work it into the you know, some home improvement costs, some car replacements, things like that. But I like the way you've got that sort of methodically being set aside into that delayed spending, unexpected account.
Yeah. And you know, some people could argue, well, doesn't that mean you're carrying too much cash? You know, opportunity cost, right? Well, yeah, but that's not the reason. That money is not there to make money. That money is to avoid me spending, you know, above and beyond my safe level, I'm not as worried about making a return on that money. So there's always a balance.
You mentioned long-term care in
Yeah.
the article, and I think that's one of the areas is most difficult for people to plan for.
Yeah.
Because, we know there's a risk. We can point out the extent of the risk, and in some instances, the math really should be able to sustain it even with those big costs. And then other instances, it could be devastating.
Yeah.
But people really are reluctant to, say, buy insurance or
it's not going to happen to me.
No.
Yeah.
Well, and I wrote an article about long-term care and my decision to self-insure. And basically what I did is I looked at the cost of buying insurance, option A. Option B is I could invest that premium every month. And what would that look like over time? And I just did side-by-side spreadsheets and ran it out. And there's a natural break-even point at, I don't know, it was in my late 70s, early 80s. I wrote an article, I can't remember but let's say it was 80 years old.
Yeah.
Okay, that's about when you're going to need it anyway. Chances are, okay, that makes sense. So that was kind of the way I went about it. But then I heard this from Christine Benz at Morningstar, which I thought was really good. One of the reasons people underspend in retirement, big problem, by the way, most people underspend what they're able to spend. Bill Bergen's new book says, hey, 4.7% is the new safe withdrawal rate, right? So most people underspend and they have much, much more. If they've been responsible, they listen to your show. I'm talking responsible people, right? Most people significantly underspend. And one of the reasons they use, well, I might have a long-term care event. Right. Fair enough. But you can't build hedge on top of hedge on top of hedge on top of hedge. You die with $20 million and your kids get it all. You could have lived a lot more life. So what Christine Benz recommends, which I think is really good, when you're calculating your safe withdrawal rate at the end of the year, right? Let's say you've got $1 million and you're saying, yeah, but I don't, so you could spend $40,000, 4% safe withdrawal rate. Yeah, but I don't want to spend that much because I want to save some of it for long-term care. Fine. What's long-term care cost? On average, let's say it's $70,000 a year. You're going to need it for 3 years. Let's call it $200,000. So you subtract the $200,000 from your net worth, and instead of calculating it off the million, you calculate it off the 800,000. And then you say, okay, I've already built in my safety buffer right there. I'm going to set that money aside kind of mentally, and I'm only going to use my net worth minus what I think long-term care is going to cost. And I'm going to use my safe withdrawal rate calculation from that. That to me is a pretty good approach. So that's kind of what I've been thinking about. That's kind of how I address it now.
That sounds kind of similar to stuff you've talked about, Jeff.
Well, I've talked about this before. My wife and I each have a Roth. We've had it for a while, and we have just bucketed the Roths, not in our withdrawal plan for the future.
Yep.
And so those funds will grow, and they're already adequate to handle a long-term care event, but they'll even grow more, and they'll be our super old age emergency fund in case everything else goes wrong. We still have that. I think that the most important point here is have a plan, have a strategy. It could be a lot of different things.
There's more than one way to approach this.
But, having no
different
plan,
cash flows and different, composition of the portfolio and all that. If that's how you want to think about it, but it's a good point. Just have a plan.
Have a plan. And to Fritz's point, don't underlive the life that you can live because you don't have a plan. That's ridiculous, actually. Have a plan, and it'll be in your plan. Stay on your plan. Meet your advisor once a year. Go over your plan, and you'll be ready for whatever that is.
Fritz, I'm really curious. We're going to have you back because you're great. This was a lot of fun.
Thanks.
I hear people talking about guardrails, and I'm always reluctant to encourage people to think about guardrails because it just doesn't match behavioral characteristics for most people. What's your take on that approach?
I mean, clearly, if you look at all the analysis that's been done, being flexible in your spending. So let's define the way I would define guardrails is this. You've kind of got a range of spending. Let's say it's anywhere from 3% to 5%, just to pick a number. And you can spend 3 to 5% of your net worth every year. That's fine. What if your portfolio tanks, right? Well, by definition, the guardrails say because your portfolio's down, you're going to adjust your spending down.
Right.
That's natural human behavior anyway. You're probably not going to take that vacation. You're not going to do that home improvement project you were thinking about because the market's tanked and you're kind of nervous. So that's kind of going to happen anyway. So that's one thing I think about it. And then I'll tell you what I do. The second thing is make sure when you're building up your expected expenses that you build you're not just covering your necessities.
Right.
You can do it in a variety of ways, but build some discretionary buffer into your spending so that if you do have to take down some spending, no problem. I'll just whack out that category for a year. We'll be fine. It's a natural. Yeah, it works. Yeah. So all the research says absolutely guardrails do maximize your chance of your money lasting longer than you do. It's wise to have some kind of guardrail approach. So what I do is every year I do my net worth. I do a safe withdrawal rate calculation from 3, 3.5, 4, 4.5%. So I get different numbers that I can withdraw. And I typically try to stay under 4%. I'm a conservative. But I know that if the market tanks, I'm not uncomfortable going to 4.5%. So the market goes down, I can maybe bump it up to 4.5% of that lower net worth. So maybe I don't have to take the entire haircut on my spending, but I'm going to take a little bit most likely. And realistically, that's probably what I'm going to do anyway. So it's a methodology that takes into account the reality that your portfolio is moving. Now, fortunately, I retired in 2018. We've had, multiple years of 20+%, right? I'm actually having the other problem. I'm like, man, I got to keep spending more. Oh, no, you really don't. But I'm trying to spend more because I'm like, I can spend more right now. So We're doing an expansion on the house. We're doing some stuff. We're taking advantage of strong markets, not going over the 4%, but recognizing that, hey, this is an opportunity, listen to the math. And use that. So that's a guardrail in the positive.
Well,
right?
I guess,
you can adjust it up and down.
And I think it comes down to how disciplined one is in the way they're approaching the whole thing.
Exactly.
That's great.
I had an article that just came out on my blog this morning. It was written by Dana. She writes with me. And it was about Bill Bengen's new book, The Safe Withdrawal Rate. He's revised it up to 4.7%. Is what's more important than the safe withdrawal rate? And the conclusion is, what matters more than what your safe withdrawal rate number is do you have an annual process to monitor it and keep you on track? Right. That's what it really comes down to, which is what we're talking about.
Back to the plan.
Yeah.
Yeah. Excellent. Hey, Fritz, thanks so much for making the time to be with us. You've been a great deal of insight. It's fun to have this kind of conversation with you. What I love about it is we're talking not just math, and it's certainly part of the importance of a good financial plan, retirement plan is, having the arithmetic behind it, but it's also the intangibles, the fulfillment part of it, and making sure that you have thought about some of these characteristics that you don't always put on a spreadsheet. Yeah. And it's really important to have retirement success. Check it out to theretirementmanifesto.com. Fritz, thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me, Chris. Jeff, nice talking with you guys. I appreciate the opportunity.
We'll surely have you back.
All right. Thanks much.
Until next time, everybody, keep striving for something more.
Thank you for listening to Something More with Chris Boyd. Call us for help, whether it's for financial planning or portfolio management, insurance concerns, or those quality of life issues that make the money matters matter. Whatever's on your mind, visit us at somethingmorewithchrisboyd.com or call us toll free at 866-771-8901. Or send us your questions to amr-info@wealthenhancement.com. You're listening to Something More with Chris Boyd Financial Talk Show. Wealth Enhancement Advisory Services and J. Christopher Boyd provide investment advice on an individual basis to clients only. Proper advice depends on a complete analysis of all facts and circumstances. The information given on this program is general financial comments and cannot be relied upon as pertaining to your specific situation. Wealth Enhancement Group cannot guarantee that using the information from this show will generate profits or ensure freedom from loss. Listeners should consult their own financial advisors or conduct their own due diligence before making any financial decisions.